Good evening, everyone. It is November 7th, and what you see in front of me is the remnants of my fall tomato crop. I planted this in August with the intention of harvesting my tomato crop throughout the fall and into frost. And as luck would have it, we are scheduled to have an Arctic blast come down this weekend into next week, and I'm probably going to get a hard freeze. So I started to prune back my tomato crop, and you can see the results of the pruning that is in this blue bucket right here. And I decided to stop midway through because I wanted to take this opportunity to show you what you can expect when you don't prune your tomato crop throughout the year. And these tomato crops have been very lightly pruned, barely pruned at all, and I've let them grow very wildly up against the tomato stakes. Earlier this year in the spring, I posted a video about how to single stem your tomatoes up against a tomato stake. And in that video, which I will link to above, I encouraged active pruning to manage the tomatoes. And I did not do that here, and I want to explain very clearly why I did not do that. Now, tomatoes come from the tropical and subtropical highlands of the Americas, and in their native climate, all year round the climate exists basically between 60 degrees and the mid-80s. So tomato plants, they like to live in the Goldilocks zone where it's not too hot and it's not too cold. And they're very finicky plants, and it's why they're so difficult to grow. They don't like it too hot and they don't like it too cold, and it's why we are pretty much forced to grow them as annuals, because in almost no climate across the country is temperatures that stable and comfortable all the time. So normally here where I live on the southeastern coast of North Carolina, you plant your tomatoes in the end of March. You grow them throughout April and May. They set fruit very well throughout April and May, and then you harvest them from June to July, and at that point it basically gets too hot for the plants to set any more fruits. They get overcome by blight, and then by August they're pretty much dead and out of fruit. You rip them out, you replace them with a new crop for a fall planting. Temperatures cool back down after Labor Day, they start flowering, they produce all throughout September. You harvest them in October and into November. And that is how we do this in a perfect world. But that did not work out for me very well this year. And the reason why is because we had record heat in September and October. What most people don't know about tomatoes, because they never encounter this problem, is that they're very difficult to pollinate. Tomatoes need to drop down into the 60s and 50s at night, and they need to stay in the 70s and 80s during the day for pollen to really become viable and productive. Once temperatures get into the 90s during the day and into the 70s at night, the pollen becomes sticky and the pollen granules burst. And when you shake a tomato flower, they're generally wind pollinated, you need to see a dust come out. When it's in the mid-70s during the night and in the 90s during the day, this won't happen. They become completely infertile. And most growers that live on the West Coast, the Midwest, and the Northeast will never encounter these conditions, because even in the dead heat of July and August, it still drops into the 60s during the night, and 90s aren't persistent. But for southern gardeners like me that live on the southeastern coast of North Carolina, and as you progress down into South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and the Gulf Coast, you get those temperatures in the mid to upper 70s as lows all throughout the summer, and tomatoes just aren't viable during that point. So what happened is it never cooled off around Labor Day, and I was getting no pollination all throughout September. We had 77 days over 90 degrees this year, and we normally average 35. So that's how bad it was. So these plants were sparse throughout the end of September. So what I decided to do was strategically not prune off any of the suckers, so I would have as many flowers as possible. And with the most flowers comes the highest chance of getting some kind of fruit set. And that worked tremendously because I had flowers everywhere, and when they did finally start to set, they set like crazy in the beginning of September, or in the beginning of October, when things actually began to calm down. But the problem was the plants were completely out of control, and now you're seeing the consequences of when you don't manage and prune your tomatoes. They fall all over the place, all over themselves. I've used an incredible amount of ties to try to hold them up, and it just doesn't work well for tomato stakes. And I'll take you around the garden and show you exactly what I'm looking at here. So here you can see some of my tomato plants. This is, I think it's a Cherokee Purple. It once did stand all the way up here, but now it has fallen down and the vines have completely collapsed in on themselves because of the overwhelming weight of the fruit. And you can see them all hanging down here. The plants are just a mess, and the plant has stretched out all the ties and it's toppled in on itself. This right here, I'm not sure what tomato this is because I lost all my labels. This is another example of a plant that has completely collapsed in on itself. It used to be tied up here, but the weight of the plant has completely snapped that tie, and now it is lying down on the ground. And this is, I think this may be another, this I think is a steak sandwich hybrid. This held the ties, and you can see how big the plant is and how much fruit is on that plant, since it's actually standing upright. And the tomatoes on the other side are just as big of a mess. This plant I started to prune before the video. It was over the height of the stake. The plant right next to it is a Brandy Boy, and you can just see the massive fruits that are on it. But this is, it's so heavy, these fruits are, and the vegetative growth, that it's completely pulling the stake over. And it used to be standing up straight, but it's not anymore. It's barely hanging on. Same thing with these two plants over here. You can see this right here is completely pulling the stake over. It used to stand upright. And behind it, there is yet another tomato that has completely collapsed in on itself. You can see all of the fruit that is hanging off this tomato, and it used to be standing up here, and it's not there anymore. It's now pretty much lying in a pile on the bottom of the stake, and that's okay because I'm going to cut them down and I'm going to lay them on the garden bed, because with the frost coming I want to put a blanket over them, and I need the heat of the earth to keep them warm and keep the temperature above freezing while they're covered with a blanket. From back here you can really see how ratty and terrible the tomato plants looked. They were once standing upright and looked good, but not so much anymore. So what is my point in this video? My point is to just express to you all that if you are going to grow your tomato plants on a tomato stake, it's very important to manage their growth. Now, I've trellised my tomatoes in the past. I did trellis them the year before last, and I had fantastic results. And I think that trellising is a vastly superior way of growing indeterminate vine-style tomatoes over staking. But the reason why I staked them this year is because I moved into a new house this year, and it was a lot of setup and a lot of cost to move. And trellising is a lot more work to set up. It's a lot more costly to set up. It is a lot less mobile, and staking is very cheap. In one of my previous videos, which I'll link to above, I showed you how to buy furring strips at big box stores, and you can get yourself 8-foot tomato stakes for $1 to $2 a piece. So you really can't beat the ease, the cheapness, the mobility. It is really the most efficient way to deal with your tomatoes per dollar. But the issue with them is you have to really limit the number of main growth stems. Ideally, you'll limit them to 1, and that will decrease tomato productivity, since less control and less management means you're going to have to limit your suckers, limit your main stems, which means less flowers, which means less tomatoes. So weigh your options. As with everything in life, it seems the more money you spend on infrastructure, the more you can grow. So you really have to decide what's more important to you. Do you want to be space efficient, cost efficient, and mobile, or grow the most amount of tomatoes that you can out of one plant? I'll also link to above my trellising video, which I built a trellis the growing season before last and had fantastic results. And here is what the tomatoes look like. I ripped out all of the tomato stakes, and they are lying on the ground nice and comfortably. So when I put a heavy frost blanket on top of them, the idea is that the ground will keep the tomatoes warm with the heat locked in from the earth. And hopefully that will keep them comfortable throughout the night. Here you can see all the tomato stakes that I pulled up from the ground. And you can also see a number of tomatoes that I picked or that fell off as I was pulling all of the tomatoes off their stakes. Alright everyone, I hope you enjoyed today's video and I hope you got something interesting out of it. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel for future updates and more videos like these. And if you like the video, please hit the like button, give me a thumbs up. If you're interested in anything I use in the garden, check out the video description. Everything I use is in the description, as well as in the Amazon storefront link in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all again next time.